The dock is silent before the light comes. Frost has settled across the wooden planking overnight, and the few people standing at the waterfront are not moving quickly. They are waiting. They have been waiting for days. Some of them, in a deeper sense, for months. Somewhere beyond the headland, the engine of a ship is already running. This is the north shore of the St. Lawrence. The temperature is 4 degrees above zero. Wind is coming in from the northeast at roughly 20 kilometers per hour. But the closest road ends more than 300 kilometers south of here. Everything that arrives in this community arrives by water. The vessel is the Nordic Express. She operates the lower North Shore supply route, one of the most remote passenger and cargo ferry services in North America. She is 115 meters in length, capable of carrying general freight, refrigerated containers, fuel, construction materials, vehicles, and passengers across 11 communities that share no road connection to the rest of Canada. The route begins in Sept-Îles. From there, the ship moves east along the shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, stopping at 11 communities over the course of roughly a week before turning around and making the return passage. For most of these communities, this ship is not a convenience. It is the only reliable link to the outside world. The loading began the night before at the terminal in Sept-Îles. Some crane operators worked under floodlights to position refrigerated containers carrying groceries, medicines, and frozen goods. Lumber was palletized and secured to the forward deck. A snowmobile was lifted by chain sling and lowered into the vehicle hold. By 3 in the morning, the hatches were sealed. The Nordic Express departed in darkness. The pilot brought her clear of the breakwater and handed navigation back to the ship's captain before the first light reached the water. But the engines, 2 diesel-electric units producing a combined output near 7,500 horsepower, settled into their cruising rhythm. The hull cut through low swells running at roughly a meter in height. Inside the wheelhouse, the chart table shows the lower North Shore stops in sequence: Natashquan, Kagaska, La Romaine, Harrington Harbour, Tête-à-la-Baleine, La Tabatière, Saint-Augustin. Each name represents a community, and each community has been sending its supply list forward for weeks. The ship carries what was ordered, nothing more. Nothing arrives by other means. By the time the first stop approaches, the sun is fully up and the light has gone flat across the water. Harrington Harbour appears first as a cluster of white and grey structures on a low rocky island, connected by wooden boardwalks because the terrain does not allow for roads. The ship slows. The anchor chain runs, the crew prepares the tender launch, and the residents already know the ship is here. Someone had the radio on. Someone else saw the silhouette from a window. Within 20 minutes, the dock is populated. Adults, children, an older man in a canvas jacket who walks with a cane but does not slow down. For a community of 300 people, the arrival of this ship is not an ordinary event. Unloading here does not happen at a large terminal. There is no crane on the dock. Everything is moved by hand, by dolly, by the careful maneuvering of small forklifts on planking that flexes under the weight. Bags of flour, propane canisters, a washing machine still in its cardboard factory box, cases of canned goods stacked chest-high on a hand truck. A woman in her 50s signs a manifest form with a pen borrowed from a deckhand. She checks a box labelled pharmaceuticals without expression. And the box gets carried up the boardwalk to the nursing station by a younger man who holds it level with both hands. There is no pharmacy in Harrington Harbour. There has never been one. The Nordic Express does not wait long at each stop. She carries a schedule, and the schedule must hold across 11 communities and hundreds of kilometres of coastline. After 90 minutes at Harrington Harbour, the tender is recalled. The last containers are checked against the manifest. The anchor comes up. Calm the engines increase to cruising speed. Between communities, the ship moves through water that is largely empty. There are no other vessels on most of these stretches. Seabirds cross the bow at low altitude and peel away without landing. The lower North Shore is one of the least visited coastlines in eastern Canada. Not because it is inaccessible by sea, but because there is no other reason to come here unless you belong here. The crew numbers 18. They rotate on a schedule of several weeks on, several weeks off. Key for the duration of their rotation, this ship is their home. The cook prepares 3 meals a day in a galley that rocks slightly with each swell. Deckhands stand watch through the night in 2-hour shifts. The chief engineer checks the engine room twice each day whether anything requires attention or not. By late afternoon, the ship reaches La Romaine, one of the larger communities on the route, with a population near 1,200, predominantly Innu. The dock here is more substantial. There is a small warehouse behind it. While the local band council has organized volunteers to help move goods from the dock to where they need to go. Children help carry boxes. Nobody is standing to the side. The manifest for La Romaine is long. Roofing materials, engine parts for a generator, hundreds of kilograms of flour and sugar, school supplies addressed to the community school, a shipping container of building lumber. The offload takes more than 3 hours, and the light begins to fade before the last pallet is cleared from the dock. The ship does not berth overnight at La Romaine. She anchors offshore in 12 meters of water while the crew rests in rotating watches. The temperature drops to 2 degrees above zero. A thin layer of mist settles across the surface of the Gulf. The navigation lights burn steadily in the dark. The community on shore is quiet now. At dawn, the eastward leg continues. The next several stops are smaller. Some communities number fewer than 200 people. Some docks are little more than floating pontoon structures that rise and fall with the tide. The ship's tender does most of the work. The procedure is the same at each stop: anchor, deploy tender, offload, take on outgoing freight, recover tender, move on. There are people who have lived on the lower North Shore their entire lives and have never driven on a highway. There are children who know this ship by name, the way other children know school buses. The arrival of the Nordic Express marks time the same way seasons do, something that can be counted on, something whose absence would change the fundamental character of life here. The route's eastern terminus is Blanc-Sablon, near the Labrador border. By the time the ship arrives here, she has travelled more than 400 kilometres from Sept-Îles and offloaded freight for 10 communities. The Blanc-Sablon dock is larger, connected to a short road system that links to the Labrador Straits ferry, offering a tenuous land and sea connection back to the road network of mainland Canada. The turnaround at Blanc-Sablon is efficient. But what outgoing freight exists? Fish, local goods, personal packages, occasionally a vehicle being sent south, is loaded while the inbound cargo is still being cleared. The crew does not rest long. The return passage must begin before weather conditions are forecast to deteriorate along the northern coast later in the week. Weather on the lower North Shore does not give long warnings. Fog can set in within an hour. Wind from the northeast can rise to gale force overnight. In late summer and fall, the Saint. St. Lawrence is a different body of water than it is in July, colder, heavier, more unpredictable. The captain monitors the forecast twice daily and adjusts the return schedule accordingly. The return passage is harder. The ship is now running northwest into a building headwind, and the swells are steeper on the return leg, 2 meters and rising, the hull lifting and dropping with enough force that unsecured items must be stowed. The engineers monitor the engine room bilge pumps, and the deckhands on watch brace against the wheelhouse windows and say nothing. This is what the lower North Shore route requires of the ship and everyone on it. Not just the ability to transport goods, but the ability to keep transporting goods under conditions that would cause other services to cancel or delay. The communities on this coastline cannot afford delay. A delayed shipment of heating fuel in October is not an inconvenience. It is a serious problem. The ship carries fuel as well as freight. Or on the lower North Shore, the diesel fuel used for home heating and electrical generation cannot be stored indefinitely. It arrives by ship in quantities calculated to last until the next delivery. If the ship does not come, the calculation fails. In a region where winter temperatures fall well below -30 degrees Celsius, fuel is not optional. The service has operated along this coastline for generations, under different vessel names and different operators. The current operator, Relays Nordic, runs the route under contract with the Quebec provincial government, which subsidizes the service because the private market alone cannot make it economically viable. The ship must run even when the passenger count is low and the freight volume does not justify the fuel cost. By the time the ship is 3 days into the return journey, the crew has settled back into the routine of the voyage. Meals are at set times, watch schedules are posted in the companionway, the deck log is updated every 4 hours. A deckhand is mending a cargo net in the stern working area. The engine room is 34 degrees and smells of diesel and hot metal. The lower North Shore route runs from approximately April through January, suspended during the deepest winter months, when ice conditions on the St. Lawrence make navigation along the exposed coastline too dangerous for a ship of the Nordic Express's class. During those months, air transport carries what it can, height at a cost far beyond what most residents could sustain without assistance. For people in southern Quebec, in Montreal or Quebec City, this coastline is a name on a map, if it registers at all. But for the 9,000 people who live along the lower North Shore, it is the only world they have, and the ship that serves them is not background to their lives. It is one of the central facts of those lives. There have been discussions over the years about building a road along the lower North Shore, a proposal that would change this coastline permanently. Engineering assessments have described the terrain as exceptionally difficult, and the cost is among the highest per kilometre for any Canadian road project. No road has been built. The ship continues to run. Late on the 4th day of the return passage, the ship passes Natashquan, the westernmost community that has no road connection. Beyond Natashquan, the highway begins, Route 138, which runs west along the North Shore of the St. Lawrence all the way to Quebec City. The ship enters a different world at that point, one with roads and gas stations and cell phone coverage. The Nordic Express arrives back in Sept-Îles on the evening of the 5th day. The return cargo has been offloaded. The crew signs out. In 48 hours, loading will begin again for the next eastbound departure. The dock at Sept-Îles will be active through the night, with trucks delivering goods and fuel for the next trip. The people who work this route understand something that is not widely understood about Canada. The country's geography is not equally served by its infrastructure. The map shows a continuous nation, but the experience of that nation is not continuous. There are places inside Canada that function in a different register, older, slower, are more dependent on single supply lines that cannot be allowed to fail. The captain of the Nordic Express has run this route for 11 years. She knows the anchorages by feel as much as by chart. She knows which communities offload quickly and which will need more time. She knows when to push through weather and when to hold position and wait. This knowledge is not learned in a classroom. It accumulates slowly over years, voyage by voyage. There are passengers on this ship as well, but not tourists. There is nothing here that draws tourists. These are residents returning to their communities from medical appointments in Sept-Îles or Quebec City, students coming home for seasonal breaks, families travelling between the stops. They eat in the ship's small dining area and sleep in its functional cabins, and they know the voyage well. One passenger, a man returning to Tête-à-la-Baleine after a knee surgery in Quebec City, has made this crossing more than 70 times. But he says the ship always feels the same. It is the same engine pitch, the same motion in a following sea. He says there is comfort in that consistency. When you live somewhere that most people have never heard of, it helps to know that the connection is reliable. The Nordic Express is not the only means of survival along this coastline. Communities have power generation, local fishing, local knowledge built over generations. But in the modern configuration of how these communities exist, with oil heat, with grocery needs, linked with medical supply chains, with school materials, the ship is the thread that holds the system together. As the season advances toward November, the stops become more urgent. Each delivery must anticipate what cannot come by air during the months when the ship is suspended. Storage must be calculated carefully. Communities work through their supply lists with a precision that reflects long experience of isolation. Nothing is ordered carelessly. Everything that runs out in February was accounted for in October. But the final voyage of the season carries the weight of that calculation. The last ship before winter is not simply a supply run, it is the closing of an account that won't be opened again for months. After it departs, the coastline returns to a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of an ordinary morning, but the quiet of a place that has gone back to depending on itself. Somewhere along this coastline, the Nordic Express will come again in the spring. The ice will be retreating. The light will be different. A dock will be waiting. Someone will have the radio on. The cycle that has governed this coastline for generations does not end. The ship will return. The community will receive it. The work will continue as it always has, without ceremony, without pause.